very much. I am Laurie-Beth Robbins, and I'm very grateful to be here today and to embrace and tackle a fragile, albeit all too important topic that nobody is immune to. And surely there are far sexier subjects to pontificate about, like ostrich steak carpaccio or barely seared mi-qui style salmon with the luscious skin crisped ever so magnificently like fantastic cracklings. Yes, to release the kraken of exotic, healthful cuisine is my magnificent obsession. Despite so many people having anxiety on epic scales when it comes to them fearing or commandeering that genre called diet or food or public speaking. And yet those are my two greatest loves and my raison d'etre to a degree too. For it is through those themes that I was saved from anxiety. And it is via those passions too that I have an opportunity every single day to share my greatest innate gift with the world, which is getting people excited about life and indirectly, therefore, helping them to slay their own anxiety too. Yes, food and wine make up my world. But my father did teach me that libation is never ever to go to in anxiety or sorrows. No, wine for me is a very happy thing. We raise our big goblet of gratitude toward life and celebrations, not sadness. But enough of all this serious stuff. Let's go slay some dragons and get down to the fun. At the age of 4, I sat cross-legged in the kitchen of our tiny modular home. That's right, the house came down from Canada in 2 little halves and was put upon a cellar. And I had more love and gourmet treasures in that little abode. The fact that there were 4 or 5 fondue pots in the house, yet our cars were outside plugged in with orange extension cords on a cold day did teach me, and early on, that food was the priority. And I loved that. It was normal in our house to quell and rave about the meal, or to find an artichoke sexy even, or to get excited about white anchovies, or to try 2 or 3 different Dijon mustards that were procured out of state even, and to decide which pungency I liked the best. And I had vino, yes I did. I had a little glass of wine nightly with my dinner from age 10, and ever since. And okay, so that glass has gotten bigger over the years, and the wine has gotten better, but it has always been and still is a nightly food pairing to me and a sacred entity. Not a drink to get drunk kind of thing, not a drink to drown anxiety kind of thing. But I was 4 and on the floor, and I was looking at my mother, who was fat. She was. And I loved her anyway, and I didn't think much about that at age 4, and I didn't understand much about that at age 4. But years and tears later, I would grasp with so much gratitude the fact that I never learned body hate or anxiety and guilt and shame around food, or jealousy and comparison to other women, or a host of insidious and hideous behavioral patterns that are learned behavior, and many people have much anxiety about. And that was all due to the security which my mother demonstrated despite her being heavy. But she was heavy back then. She's not today. She's actually very skinny, and she's a vegan. All right. No. No, my mother is a vegan, my father is a vegan, my sister is a vegan, my niece is a vegan. Do you know, for a while, my brother and his wife tried, oh, it's a damn conspiracy, let me tell you, all right? A coup, really. We can't eat together as a family anymore. You want to talk about anxiety, but I digress. But back then, my mom did eat animal, and she was standing in the kitchen wearing a turtleneck without a bra, even though she was so thick. And she had this little red do-rag on her head, which she called a babushka. And she had her flare-out jeans, which she referred to as dungarees. And she was smacking together some hamburger meat for the family dinner that would go upon a humble piece of tinfoil on a cookie sheet and get slid into our little electric oven. But before she did that, she'd shake some salt on a glob of the raw hamburger and pop it into her mouth and eat it. And one would make the sheet, and one she then would eat. And onward this would go with the salted raw meat. And I looked up. Yes, up in every sense of the word. And my doe-eyed soul and green eyes then growing the size of plump, succulent olives. I suppose everything is a food to me. I looked up, gazing at that zoftic, sexy woman, comfortable in her own skin, woman comfortable in her own body, woman with a palate and a penchant and a passion and love and warmth for life and for experiences and for food, yes. And I saw in that moment the most beautiful woman that to this day I have ever seen. That I would become that warmth and that palate and that attitude toward life. Yes, my glass is always half full, and that energy is probably not any kind of a mystery or intricate math, but surely the home base from which I would work out of, yes, I chose my parents well, is very responsible for saving my life greatly too. And so as a woman who has never so much as ever taken a single Xanax or antidepressants or prescription meds of any kind whatsoever, or had psychotherapy or counseling for anxiety or depression, although I did date and sleep with a man who was a psychiatrist, true be that. Oh, and a guy, a psychologist, not at the same time. But because I didn't spend my moments on their couches talking, per se. And so I was never ensconced in the throngs of social convention or the traditional methods of treating and identifying anxiety. And that does not make me better or worse, clearly, than anybody, mind you. And I judge not those who are on prescription meds. But my story is a little bit different, and thus the one I can share. For it was only 2 years after that, at the tiny age of 6, when my indoctrination into anxiety did begin, and with dramatic aplomb. And I landed in the hospital with knots and pains and cramps in my stomach, and the doctors performed a battery of tests only to proclaim that this child was under a tremendous amount of stress because, let's face it, 6-year-olds in Vermont are a pretty stressed out group of people. But indeed I was, because at that tiny, tender age, I began being bullied so brutally and so sickeningly that today I am not entirely certain that the shenanigans which I was the benefactor of then would even remotely in any way, shape, or form be legal today. I'm not sure about that. But accordingly back then, I just cried every day after school, bar none, from age 6 all the way up to age 18 on my last day of ghastly high school as it be, but for when I was competing in speech tournaments, as that did catapult me into my zone. Now, zones are different for all of us, mind you, and for many it is about sports, and for some it is music, and for me it was food and public speaking. But our zones demand that we do summon some strength from within and go looking for the good. And something better than good and better than magical and better than phenomenal did happen when I would stand and deliver. And just for a moment in time, it would transport me. It would transport me somewhere else. And in that somewhere else, I couldn't hear them. I couldn't hear my tormentors. I couldn't remember the mean things which they had done. And so if only for a moment in time, and beautifully so, when I was up front and center and quite frankly, where I was supposed to be, I was, alas, 150% happy. And I was in my element, and I had discovered my authentic self. But there is a far more important cannonball in the room when we talk about anxiety, and that has followed me all over this world wherever I have been, like a domino effect. And I have lived all over this big, beautiful globe, and for such how very grateful am I. Not all of it was easy, mind you, but it certainly has contributed to the woman I am today and the person I am becoming, because you see, anxiety brings with it massive energy. And it is what we do with that energy which separates us. And to their credit, my parents did do something very, very right. And they helped to uncork and foster my palate and my prowess and my passions. And I would barter with them to be taken to gourmet restaurants in reward for winning speech tournaments. And as a result, I would become an undefeated orator throughout my schooling and throughout my entire state even, and take the leads in theater and plays. And then I would go on to teach public speaking and mass communications on the college level as an adjunct professor, on and off between my travels and amid some of my food and wine doings too. And in that small way, help students to rise up above their fear and anxiety of speaking, but also teach them how that was so analogous to slaying facets of anxiety in their life elsewhere too. Because the same galvanizing, powerful energy which anxiety presents does only bring with it a choice. It is only a choice of what we choose to do with it when it shows up. And I had chosen to get very politically active at a young age, despite politics being a highly anxiety-ridden field. And so in that youthful political time, I would campaign successfully to become the youngest woman in the country that election year to be a delegate at the Democratic National Convention. That year I was 17. And I would be 18 by the time I was on the convention floor, and certainly 18 by the time I would be voting that fall. But when I was campaigning to become a delegate, I was 17 and screaming liberal. And I was a virgin, and I thought that politics was far more interesting than boys. And I thought that all we need is peace and love and art. And I don't care what anybody thinks, because I still find politics to be more interesting than boys. I mean, some boys. Every now and then an intriguing gent does come. All right. I jest merely, sort of. But I think that if we're doing this dance called life correctly and navigating anxiety smoothly and lucidly too, therefore, then we do change. And so the same girl at 17 years old is not the same woman today in many ways at 47 or turning 48 in April. And I would worry if it was. But when we jump into high anxiety-ridden fields, we have an opportunity to grow. Not the fat way, but the good way. And when we seek out and we brush elbows with and we meet and greet and hug the strong, when we hug people who have been on the real deal front lines of living, who have navigated authentic anxiety, who have known authentic struggle, then we receive transmitted energy from them. Yes, we surely do. A little bit of that contagious strength, a little bit of that contagious enthusiasm, a little bit of that anxiety-slashing finesse does come into our world too. And when I was a delegate, I would meet a woman who could not get out of her seat when I hugged her. She was in a wheelchair. And due to old age elements or maybe health ailments or a smattering of both, but I knew then, even at that formative and impressionable age of just 18, I knew that she was strong, and I knew that she was authentically knowing struggle, and I knew that she had navigated anxiety and that she was a real person. For that woman who did not get out of her seat was Rosa Parks. And I do believe that when we hug the strong, it goes a long way. And I hug every single person who I do meet on every day, bar none, whether they think I'm nutty or not. And as I say, it's one of these, and I do believe that it is important. But I wasn't hugging myself fully then, at the young age of 18. And I still had much unresolved anxiety from the big, bad bullying days. And so, in a way, just sort of flitting and flailing and dating and negating my strengths and talents in my insouciant 20s and 30s, like a vicious game of pin the tail on the donkey to a degree, but to no avail or win. I would take my then lonely and quite vulnerable self smack over to the Mediterranean at age 27, having answered an ad to be an administrative assistant there, and as a result, nearly losing my life in Greece. Yes, just by a hair or split second in time, I was spared from being sold into the diabolical fiefdoms and maniacally massive empires of sex, slavery, and trafficking abroad. Oh, I suppose in my mind's eye back then, I just saw myself sauntering over to that palm tree-clad haven and marrying a Greek god, or devouring plump octopus plucked right out of the sea thrashed against vast rocks first to be as tender as can be, or maybe just becoming one with that bucolic, paradisiacal, white stucco architecture imagery right off of a damn calendar or out of a coffee table book, but above all else, it allowing me to gallop and at supersonic speed away from any anxiety. Yes, go to Greece, some said. It'll be fun, they said. But my big fat Greek comedy turned tragedy and mighty fast. For just as soon as I had arrived on the other side of the world, only to recognize that no job did really exist. It was not long afterward when I was approached and convincingly coaxed and befriended by a pack of Balkan men, Serbian, Albanian, Bulgarian, and Greek. They were in shipping, as most people there were, but what or whom they were shipping, I was naively ignorant to at that time. And they seamlessly built and won my trust, one of them even hosting me in their home on the day of the Greek Easter feast with the entire spit-roasted lamb and the entire spit-roasted goat, and I gourmeted myself, and I ate everything from the intestines to the eyes. Oh yeah, when in Athens, right? It's part of the culture. But part of their pack wasn't there yet. And when a certain mogul was back in town after much travel, a job for me was now to exist. But because of the disgusting and obfuscating methods which these traffickers use, boyfriends posed, jobs promised, women even being brought in now, yes, to recruit girls in a more believable way to these snares. And in that corrupt part of the world, policemen and frontliners getting kickbacks of coin aplenty to assist in these macabre and gruesome transactions too. And so one does not see it coming, despite anxiety being birthed in it and fostered in it all along and unavoidably erupting volcanically from it down the road. And so I was not given a job. And instead I was put into a black Mercedes with a handful of those men. And I was driven to the airport. And I was put onto a plane with one of them, and I was flown to the north of Greece, up near a border, and I was put into a teeny hotel, and I would watch while the men smoked, and they laughed, and they drank thick, murky, muddy coffee, and then they were changing up a car license plate. Yes, cutting and pasting different numbers on it before I was to be driven for my job across a border, or what probably would have been more like me being drugged and lugged to Bulgaria or who knows where. But first, since we are talking about anxiety, the men do see to it that they get their piece of the girl before she is disease-ridden and off and abused and misused in what is notorious and barbaric and monstrous and known to traffickers as the break-in period. The first 24 hours after the girls are sold, when upwards of 30 men are brought in round the clock to violently, in tandem with emotional and verbal abuse, make it clear that this is the end and that the girls are not getting out. I was no exception to their earlier chronological doings, therefore, and accordingly was raped by one man first when there was a pit stop made to some boss en route to the airport in Athens, and then by another man in the small hotel in the north in the morning, just prior to what would have been that fateful drive, which I am mighty grateful to share I never made. Yes, somebody was looking out for me on that day from up above, and I do count my lucky stars, and I thank God with every breath. But today I have, and what I was set up for would have unequivocally been the sickest of the sick with angst and anxiety, but also the torturous end of me. Today, however, I have learned to slay that animal of anxiety swiftly and ferociously, and like a savage beast, somebody said, their words, but it also helps me to reinvigorate others and to help them, yes, I'm good at it, slay their nervousness and their anxiety too. But in order for any of us to do that, we have to get into it quickly and eradicate the negative before it builds. And we have to then proactively redirect all of that angst into a productive and positive form of good. And it is integral in moments of anxiety, regardless of external circumstances, that we do go looking for the good. Because I have come too far and through a bit of mud and epic growth to not at this stage and age of my life have, well, a hell of a lot of authentic confidence, true be that, but also to cherish and love and celebrate myself inside and out on every single day, and so have you. Every single one of us has experienced joy and struggle. And so just like the turbulence on an airplane does mean that we are moving, and therefore we are getting closer to our dreams and our destination despite the bumps, so too does anxiety masterfully remind us that we are aware and awake and alive. Yeah, alive. And it is through my challenges and my successes too that I was introduced to my extraordinary reflexes, a trait that I so tragically was unaware of until adulthood, and then wow, wasn't that a surprise? And reflexes are critical in moments of anxiety. For even in my true life and near-death experience abroad, way before the famous Taken movies and Quentin Tarantino's Hostel flicks about these themes too, Liam Neeson didn't arrive on cue, and I saved my own rear. I did. And as you leave now, if I may invite you to take away any piece of my heart, soul, and might, my travels and my experiences thus far, it is this. The same exact energy which anxiety does rear its head with, that causes the chest to pound and brings the panic attacks on, and it makes that head lightheadedness spin, and that incomprehensible worry and that downright palpable fear does demand that we jump into our zones, we go looking for the good, we hug the strong. You know what? Hug everybody. And we recognize that that same sensation that is bringing about the frenetic and pathetic seeming moments is bringing you a choice. It is only bringing you a choice of what you will do with it. And then, my friends, anxiety will still come knocking and as the enemy, but it won't stay that way. I am Laurie-Beth Robbins, and today the pleasure was absolutely mine. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me. Thank you.